There is a truth almost everyone who has ever loved a narcissist only realizes after they've stepped out of the shock of the pain. The very things you endured, the things you cried over, the things you suppressed, and the things you believed had broken you, become the very things they can never escape from. Empaths always believe pain means failure, that when they're deeply hurt, they've lost. But no one tells them that in the world of a narcissist, a silent law is always at work. Anything they inflict on your heart eventually comes back to them not as revenge, not as mystical karma, but in the most subtle and ruthless way, they are forced to live with the emptiness your presence once covered. When you were still there, they never had to face the darkest parts of themselves because you were unconsciously acting as a bright mirror, a stabilizing anchor, a source of worth they could never create on their own. But when you hurt so much that you can no longer stay, when you withdraw your energy, when you stop explaining, stop enduring, stop holding everything together, that moment drops them into a void they were never prepared to face. Your pain becomes the first crack in their mask. Then it becomes a deeper fracture. Then it becomes the quiet collapse no one sees from the outside, but it eats at them day after day. No one says it out loud, but this is the real shape of karma, not punishment, but being forced to live with the truth they once used you to avoid. And the bitterest thing for a narcissist is never losing you. It's realizing that you were the best part that ever existed in their life, and they destroyed it with their own hands. Your pain becomes their karma, because you rise, and they cannot. You walk away, and they remain stuck. You grow, and they repeat the same hollow cycle you once helped them escape. This is not a story of revenge. This is the deepest psychological law. When the light leaves, the darkness has nothing left to cling to but itself. The pain of an empath has a very specific structure. It is not just an emotional wound, but an internal collapse that forces them to re-examine their entire inner world. Other people may get angry, argue, or project outward to regain temporary balance. But the empath operates differently. They turn inward. They feel so deeply that the pain doesn't stop at the emotional level. It sinks down into the unconscious, into what Jung called shadow material, the layers of darkness people usually avoid confronting. And because they feel that deeply, they often assume they are weaker, more vulnerable, more easily manipulated. But the truth is the opposite. Feeling deeply is a capacity. Hurting deeply is a calling. Being wounded intensely is an awakening. When a narcissist hurts them, what gets touched is not just the heart. It is the unconscious territory they've never visited. The wound becomes a doorway that opens up questions they never dared to ask. Where are my boundaries? What is my worth? Why do I endure this? Why do I keep giving even when I'm exhausted? Why do I try to save people who don't want to be saved? Each question echoes from the darkness, forcing them to dig into themselves for answers. And in that process, they begin to see the truth. They don't hurt because they're weak. They hurt because they're perceptive. They don't collapse because they're inadequate. They collapse because they are honest with their emotions. And that honesty is the first seed of awakening. Pain stops the empath not to break them, but to illuminate. It forces them to see what love, hope, and compassion had once blurred. They begin recognizing their old patterns: unconditional sacrifice, forgiving too quickly, over-explaining, enduring too long. They see that they always became the anchor for people who never intended to stand on their own. They realize they had unconsciously become a temporary therapy for empty souls, and that this was never love. It was depletion. And the moment they understand that, the entire internal system begins to reorganize. When the empath steps out of confusion and begins to see everything clearly, a silent but powerful shift occurs. They withdraw their energy. Not loudly, not with declarations or arguments, simply by no longer responding the way the narcissist expects. This is what begins to dismantle the narcissist's entire control system. The first thing that changes is that they speak less. Not silence as punishment, but silence because they finally understand that speaking changes nothing. They stop revealing what they think and feel, because every disclosure has been used against them. When sharing stops, the emotional bridge disappears, and the narcissist feels that instantly. The second thing is delayed or absent reactions. What used to devastate them, confuse them, or push them into fixing things now receives a strange calm instead. A hostile message? Leave it. A baseless accusation? No explanation. A silent treatment game? No chasing. The distance makes the narcissist uneasy because they can no longer read the empath's emotions, gauge their state, or manipulate their reactions. The third thing is they stop trying to reconnect. In the past, they were the peacemaker, the one who soothed, the one who brought both sides back together. When this stops, the narcissist suddenly faces a void they never prepared for, the void of themselves. They were accustomed to being anchored by your patience and empathy, so when that anchor is removed, they start to wobble. Finally, the empath's withdrawal makes them unreadable. And for a narcissist, being unable to read someone is the same as being unable to control them, predict them, or manipulate them. It strikes at their deepest fear, losing power. And this becomes the beginning of the chain reaction that leads to the narcissist's psychological collapse. But what few people realize is that throughout the entire relationship, the empath had been unconsciously shielding the narcissist from consequences they should have faced. Your kindness softened their outbursts. Your patience masked their erratic emotional shifts that others would instantly recognize as unstable. Your stability created a temporary order, allowing them to avoid confronting their inner chaos. In other words, while they were hurting you, you were absorbing the impact they should have felt. You carried their pain, and they escaped the responsibility that belonged to them. Because of this unconscious protection, they never truly saw the consequences of their behavior. But when you leave, when you're no longer there to soften their sharp edges, everything they ran from returns to its rightful owner. It no longer spills onto you. It no longer disperses into the environment. It falls directly onto them. In this context, karma is not a mystical punishment. It is simply reality returning to its proper place once no one stands in the middle to absorb it. And the moment the empath steps out of that absorbing role, a sequence of events unfolds that the narcissist could never predict. First, they are forced to face who they really are, something they've avoided their entire life. When you were there, you reflected the most flattering version of them, helping them feel valuable, grounded, identified. But when that light disappears, they are thrown back into the old emptiness you once softened. The hunger they feel now is not for you. It is for a mirror that tells them who they are. This is the beginning of their internal panic, the kind they never speak about but feel every day. Next, their manipulative strategies start failing. All the subtle attacks, emotional punches, and narrative twisting that once bewildered you now fall flat. Without your emotional reactions, their techniques become arrows shot into the void. And for someone who survives on controlling other people's emotions, losing that ability is like standing on stage after the audience has left humiliating, empty, and directionless. Then they lose the only source of emotional regulation they ever had. Though they never admitted it, you were the one who knew how to calm them, assemble their scattered pieces, and transform their chaos into something manageable. When you leave, they don't just lose you, they lose their capacity to handle themselves. And because new supplies are shallow, fragile, and short-lived, nothing stabilizes them the way you once did. Then comes the shame, the emotion they hide most fiercely. For years, they displaced responsibility onto you, onto circumstances, onto anyone else to avoid confronting their own faults. Without you acting as the landing pad for their denial, the blame has nowhere to go but back toward them. For a narcissist, shame is unbearable because it forces them to face the raw truth they've spent a lifetime running from. Once there is no one left to shield them, that shame surges and devours them from the inside, causing sleepless nights, inexplicable anxiety, and waves of internal panic they cannot name. And then the most painful realization arrives. They must live with the consequence of losing the only person who ever loved them with awareness. You didn't just love with emotion, you loved with understanding, depth, and the ability to see through their mask without judgment. That is something they will never find again. New supply may excite them temporarily, but it can't fill the long-term emptiness the way your heart once could. And when they realize this, even if they never say it, that regret clings to them for a very long time. A narcissist's karma does not come from the outside. It comes from the consequences they must carry once there is no one left standing between them and the truth. Everything begins the moment you hurt so much that you have to walk away, and they are left alone inside the very shadow that only your presence once had enough light to soften. The first thing they face is emotional dysregulation. When you were there, they were used to having someone recalibrate their internal states. You made them less angry, less afraid, less confused, less heavy. Without that filter, their emotions become unmanaged. They build up, coil together, and erupt into random irritability. Quick to anger, quick to be annoyed, quick to decide others are difficult, quick to feel that everyone is against me. This destabilizes their social relationships in a domino effect. Next comes the decline in their ability to maintain their self-image. Narcissists are masters of persona building, but only when others help them. Those who praise, admire, pay attention, or submit to them. You were the one who kept their statue standing. When you disappear, they must sustain their identity with their own energy, and they quickly realize they have none. This is when arrogance turns into confusion, and confidence becomes sudden self-doubt. Then, they experience the inability to sustain new connections. Normally, after losing you, they would cling to new supply to fill the void. But those new connections lack the depth they were accustomed to with you. Conversations feel shallow, thin, lacking emotional structure. They get bored easily, disappointed easily, constantly feeling no one truly understands me. This dissatisfaction traps them in a loop of abandoning and searching, a never-ending addiction to attention that never truly satisfies. Most striking is the deterioration in their ability to hide their inner instability. When you were there, they could use silent treatment, coldness, superiority games, or criticism to maintain the upper hand. But when there is no emotional battlefield, when there is no one to react to, blame, or project onto, these tactics lose meaning. That is when a sense of uselessness creeps in. With no one left to absorb their chaos, the emotional turmoil spills directly onto themselves. With no one to fight, their inner conflicts explode like a war in the dark. Finally, they enter existential exhaustion, a hollowness so deep that every attempt to reconstruct themselves becomes forced. At night, they can't sleep because their mind won't stop. In the morning, they wake exhausted from an emptiness with no clear source. Not because they miss you, but because they are now forced to live with a version of themselves that you once softened, balanced, and stabilized. Without you, they must face their raw, unfiltered self, anxious, fragile, reactive, and profoundly empty. That is when they understand, though they will never admit it, your departure didn't just take a person away, it removed the entire emotional equilibrium they depended on. And this collapse is neither dramatic nor loud, but it is irreversible, because they cannot go back and ask you to be their anchor again, nor can they create a new one deep enough to replace what you were. The cruel irony is this. Narcissists always believe they hold absolute power in the relationship, that they decide when you hurt, when you cry, when you return, or when you weaken. They believe that the moment they want you to collapse, you will. But what they never expect is that the pain they caused becomes the foundation of the powerful self you are about to become, and that this new version of you is what terrifies them the most. Why? Because a matured empath doesn't just leave, they change the entire energetic structure of the relationship. This maturity doesn't come from revenge or bitterness. It comes from having had enough. When an empath reaches their final threshold, they don't explode, they awaken. And that awakening marks the deepest shift in your journey. You no longer want to save anyone, prove anything, or hold on to what is not yours. You return to yourself, and that is something the narcissist can never control. Your maturity shows most clearly in the way you begin to see things as they are, not as you hope they could be. This is where the narcissist loses the most power. When illusion collapses, their tactics collapse. When you see their true motives, the manipulations that once tangled you now become surprisingly predictable. A calm look from you can destabilize their entire control system because it reveals that you've figured them out. Next, your growth destroys the very foundation of their power, your emotional reactions. When you no longer react, you become unextractable, unreadable, unstimulated. An empath who was once soft as water now knows how to set boundaries, say no, stay silent, and withdraw energy at the right moment, not only making the narcissist lose orientation, but making them feel irrelevant in your world. To a narcissist, irrelevance is the harshest punishment. Your maturity also severs the cycle that made them believe you'd always return. In the past, they thought a single call, a moment of weakness, a shared memory would pull you back. But when you mature, your heart is no longer moved by pity or familiarity. You realize kindness is not a reason to suffer, love is not a reason to abandon yourself, and loneliness is not a reason to return to a place that hurt you. This self-sovereignty is unbearable for them, because it destroys their last hope, the hope that you still revolve around them. Then comes the realization that keeps them awake at night. You no longer look at them with the eyes you once had. No admiration, no pity, no effort to understand, no attempt to fix, no desire to save. The gaze that used to make them feel special is now so calm it makes them feel small. For a narcissist, that calm gaze is more painful than 1,000 accusations because it tells them they have no power in your emotional world anymore. And finally, what makes your growth the ultimate karma is this. You become a version of yourself they know they will never reach again. You don't just rise, you rise in a direction they cannot follow. You leave the old story, the emotional vortex, the draining role. You step into a stronger, clearer, more conscious self. And that forces them to live forever with the ache of knowing they once had access to a soul they were never mature enough to keep. They don't lose you in the present. They lose you in the future in all the better versions of you they will never meet. That is karma. Not because you punished them, but because you no longer belong to the place that hurt you. At this stage, the scale tilts entirely in a direction the narcissist never foresaw. You are no longer playing the game. And the profound truth is you didn't leave to prove anything to them. You left to return to yourself. When an empath moves through pain and steps into maturity, they don't seek victory, fairness, or acknowledgement. They seek peace. And peace is something a narcissist will never possess. Your growth is not the ending of the relationship, it is the beginning of a new life. A life where you are no longer governed by the fear of losing someone, the desire to fix everything, or the need to be validated. You begin asking questions you never dared ask before. What kind of life do I want for myself? What kind of love do I deserve? Who am I when I'm not carrying someone else? And then you discover a truth you were never quiet enough to notice. Everything that once broke you became the foundation of your rebirth. You start seeing the world with new eyes. You walk with quiet confidence, not performative, not heavy, not defensive. You know how to set boundaries without guilt. You know how to say no without trembling. You know how to walk away without needing anyone to follow. This is the version of you the narcissist can no longer reach, no longer control, no longer shake. To them, you were once a source of light they could exploit. But to you now, that light is no longer something for anyone to take. It is something that illuminates your own path. At this point, what hurts them most is not that you left, but that you left without carrying any fragment of them with you. You don't hate them, you don't resent them, you don't seek to make them regret anything. You have grown to a place where their presence no longer influences your direction. And that is exactly what makes them feel truly insignificant. A narcissist can handle you hating them, but they cannot handle you no longer thinking about them. They can handle you hurting, but they cannot handle you healed. They can handle you needing them, but they cannot handle you no longer belonging to them. The moment you release them from your mind, your heart, and every vision of your future, that is the moment their karma reaches its deepest point. No drama, no explosions, no noise, just a silence. But it is the kind of silence they can never move past, because you didn't just walk out of their life. You stepped into a dimension where their very nature cannot survive the dimension of awareness, self-respect, clarity, and peace. And when you stand in that place and look back, you finally understand. It wasn't your pain that destroyed them. It was your healing that forced them to face what they fear the most. A world where you no longer revolve around them. When you reach the end of this journey and look back, you will recognize a truth you were never calm enough to see before. Pain is not a period. It is a comma, a turning point life uses to separate you from an older version of yourself. Everything that once broke you, the suffocating nights, the unreciprocated efforts, the arguments that repeated over and over, the moments you sacrificed so much you lost yourself, all of it turns out to be only the prologue to a rebirth you never expected. An empath does not become stronger by luck. They become stronger because of what they survived. And within that survival lies a gift a narcissist will never receive: inner maturity. A narcissist leaves a relationship unchanged. You leave it as an entirely new human being. You did not become harder, you became clearer. You did not become cold, you developed boundaries. You did not become numb, you learned how to love the right way, in the right place, with the right people. That is something they will never reach. For the narcissist only knows how to run from pain while you learned how to walk through it. They only know how to hide wounds while you know how to heal them. They only know how to build masks while you know how to remove every layer of disguise to return to the truth. And then you understand. Karma is not something that falls from the sky to punish anyone. Karma is simply the natural consequence of awakening. You rise, they fall. You heal, they face the emptiness you once filled. You move forward, they remain trapped in the cycle they created. What you gain is not victory over them, but victory over the things that once held you down. Dependence, self-doubt, fear of losing someone, the stubborn belief in something that was never real. You didn't walk away because you hated them, you walked away because you refused to betray yourself any longer. And that is the moment you are truly free. Free from old stories, free from emotional loops, free from needing to prove your worth to anyone but yourself. Now, you don't need them to understand you. You don't need them to regret anything. You don't need them to come back, because what you have now is far greater, a stronger, clearer, steadier version of yourself, and it belongs entirely to you. If you are listening, remember this. This journey does not make you bitter, it makes you awake. It does not make you lose faith, it teaches you where to place it. It does not close your heart, it teaches your heart to choose those who are worthy. And one day when you look back, you will smile and understand they were not the ones who changed you. It was your own soul that used that experience as the catalyst to awaken the person you were born to become.